eurobond market, but it is allowed. 5% of the outstanding bonds allow for the foreigners to buy. And exchange between local currency and foreign currency, that is quite restricted. So we have weak capital mobility. And some countries, we have greater capital mobility. So under these two situations, we will look at the policy implications on balance of payments and the exchange rate, and also then the adjustment process. Okay. One thing we need to keep in mind is that in a policy regime like this, greater capital mobility, capital flows dominate and determine the balance of payments outcome. In the countries where there is weaker capital mobility, the balance of payments outcome is determined largely by the trade performance, trade account, or as we call it in our model, net exposed. Therefore, these two cases, the differences between the two cases should be in your mind. With greater capital mobility in a country like that, capital flows dominate the other account, that is the exports, net exports. Therefore, interest rate is more important than anything else in order to achieve balance of payments equilibrium or foreign exchange market equilibrium. Interest rate play the major role. If you have a weaker capital mobility situation like Sri Lanka, it is net exports or the trade account play the major role to determine the balance of payment outcome because it dominates capital flows. Therefore, change in aggregate demand, it plays a major role in the foreign exchange market equilibrium. Change in aggregate demand. We will understand it clearly when we move into our discussion. So we have fiscal expansion as a case study. Later on, we will also move on to monetary expansion. And the case that we are talking about right now, it is greater capital mobility. And we also take the exchange as floating exchange rate of market determined exchange rate. So I'm going to, as the first step, because there are a couple of lines here, you may not understand sometimes, so you may have forgotten them, although I have taught all of them. So I'm going to draw with you, if you are also doing it with me, I'm going to draw some of the lines so that you can understand better. Okay. I think you are familiar with this graph. This is interest rate on the vertical axis and the income level output on the horizontal axis. So this is ISLM framework. We have IS line showing equilibrium in the output market at any point along the line. Then we have LM line showing equilibrium in the money market along the line, any point, anywhere you can mark it. So we have like this interest rate and output should be here. Then we have money market equilibrium. But you can see output market is not equilibrium, not in equilibrium, because it has to be like this. Low output should be there for the equilibrium. So this is not an equilibrium position in this case. Okay, so you have anyway at point A, both markets are in equilibrium. But what I want to highlight now is the blue line, this one. It is the balance of payments line. BOP equal to 0, foreign exchange market equilibrium, is depicted by any point on this line. It's BOP line. BOP line. Now, this is important. We are talking about greater capital mobility. If it is perfect capital mobility, this line should be horizontal. At the point where local interest rate equal foreign rate. But we are moving now a little bit away from the perfect capital mobility case, but we have greater capital mobility. That's why this line is a little bit steeper. Not so much, it's relatively a flatter line, but upward sloping line with a lower slope. You see that? So all three markets are in equilibrium at point A. Having interest rate as R naught and output as Y naught. These are equilibrium positions of the economy. And also balance of payment, which is also in equilibrium at point A, because BOP line also goes through point A. So we will mark this. Now at the next step is, I'm going to clean up the diagram, what I have drawn here. We are talking about increase in government spending. So G should, and as a result, aggregate demand should go up because government spending is part of the aggregate demand. In fact, the autonomous components of aggregate demand. Autonomous components of aggregate demand. After that, it will lead to higher output and higher interest rate. If I ask you the reason, for example, I'm going to show you now how do we show that we are increasing government spending like this. We shift this line to the then we look at the new equilibrium point. It is here. Internal equilibrium, okay? We call it when the IS and LM intersects. We call it internal equilibrium. Point is here, and you can see that output has gone up, interest rate has gone up. Now, let me ask you my old question, at least for the final time. Why does economic growth gets accelerated when the government increase spending? It is because we are creating excess demand in the output market with increased government spending. Excess demand. So that in Keynesian view, we are learning the Keynesian view now. In Keynesian view, when the aggregate demand expanded, the output should have responded, which means Y should go up. Economic growth should go up like this. So that's why output is rising like this. And the next question, why the interest rate goes up? Interest rate goes up because there is now higher output in the economy, which require more money to finance it. More money to finance it. Where does the excess money should come from? There is excess demand for money. Excess demand for money should come from the government security market, so that there will be bonds, treasury bills and treasury bonds for sale. Whereas the bond market faces less demand. The money market has faced with excess demand for money. As a result, the bond market has faced with excess supply for treasury bills and bonds. Excess supply. In any market, when there is excess supply, the price should go down. And in this bond market, when the price goes down, interest rate goes up. Price and interest rate, the two are moving in opposite directions. Bond market. I think these last couple of months, how people learn a lot of things about bonds because of this domestic debt restructuring impact on EPF. And lot of misconceptions are there. And even those who understand the reality, they can interpret it in different ways. So somebody can say that the glass is half full, and another one can say, no, that's not half full, that is half empty. So it's the way that you interpret it. Bond market. So we are talking about the same bond market here. Right, so we are moving to point B, that is here. Let me clean up these lines and get the diagram completed. I'm now actually trying to keep explaining all these step by step, however, only for the first time, okay? Not for each and every case that we are going to look at. You can see the new red line, that is after the increase in government spending, Where do you see government spending? It is here. Earlier government spending was G0. Now it is G1. Increased spending. And why do we shift it to the right? It is because the position is determined by this vertical intercept. This is something we learned earlier. If you take the IS equation, you can understand this point better. The autonomous components of aggregate demand, all are here. And now they are here because of the increase in the government spending, so that the position of the IS line change. New equilibrium is at point B. So we move from point A to point B, and you can see that output has gone up. So this moment, when the government increase spending, there will be a higher economic growth resulting from higher spending, and also there will be higher interest rate. And I explain the reasons for both. Now, the next question is, what is the situation of balance of payments at this new equilibrium point B? Earlier at the point A, it was balanced because the point was on the blue line, which is the BOP line also. Is balanced. All three markets are balanced, simultaneous equilibrium. But now point B is not there. It is outside the BOP line. So what is the situation there? And it should be a surplus. Okay, can you see that we have a surplus here at point B? Now, you should be able to understand why there is a surplus. Why not deficit? Because output also has gone up, and which will increase demand for imports, so that there will be trade deficit, so that there should be BOP deficit here. You can argue that way. But the point here is, as I explained in the previous slide, the point is we have greater capital mobility. If you have a greater capital mobility, what is important for the BOP equilibrium is capital flows and the interest rate. Capital flows can go up and down in response to changes in interest rate. Actually, to which extent the domestic interest rate deviate from international rate. We discussed those things about a couple of weeks ago. Therefore, now we have higher interest rates. You can see it here. And which is going above the international rate. And the international interest rate is given. We don't change it here. It is given rate. So the domestic interest rate can go up and down due to domestic policy changes, as it has happened now. So this will generate capital inflows. more capital inflows. And because the balance of payments outcome is determined more by capital mobility than by trade performance. So the increased capital flows can compensate for increase in imports and results in BOP surplus. So although there has been an increase in import demand, import expenditure, which can cause a deficit, but a higher increase in capital inflows can compensate even that and then result in a balance of payment surplus. That's the explanation. BOP surplus. You can see it here due to greater capital flows at new interest rate, and that can go beyond the rising imports. So at point B, we have a BOP surplus. Now, the adjustment process, it has to be adjusted because the foreign exchange market is now out of equilibrium. Out of the equilibrium. It should be adjusted now. How do we adjust it? Adjustment takes place under two exchange rate system. One thing that the central bank keep away from intervening in the foreign exchange market. The second thing that central bank intervene in the market. So if the central bank doesn't intervene in this market, our central bank didn't intervene when the exchange rate was falling from 360 rupees a dollar to 320 rupees a dollar. So exchange rate got appreciated during that period. Likewise, leave the things to the market so that we have a market determined exchange rate. That is under the market determined exchange rate, how the adjustment takes place. If the disequilibrium is adjusted according to the market determined exchange rate, then there will be exchange rate appreciation now because of the surplus in the foreign exchange market, more dollars than what is needed. Exchange rate appreciation. Appreciation of the exchange rate should have implications on the trade account. If something happens to the trade account, what should be there? Trade account is part of aggregate demand, number one, so that it should affect our IS line. It should affect our IS line, and IS line is here, new IS line. And NX is also part of our BOP line, so that it should affect our BOP blue line. Both. So the lines, both lines will move in the opposite, in the left. So you can see IS line move to here and BOP line move to here. Both dotted red and blue lines are a result of the adjustment process, and the final equilibrium point is now here at point C. So you can conclude that balance of payment surplus disappeared. Because this line is now dotted blue line, it is the balance of payment line, and the new equilibrium point is on the line. All three markets are in equilibrium at point C. So you can conclude that balance of payments equilibrium is achieved through lower minimum impact on the output level as well as the interest rate. There will be little impact on these two variables in the adjustment process, real output and the interest rate. But if you have a fixed exchange rate, or if the central bank is going to intervene in the market, what will happen? So remember point C, I'm going to show you later also. That is fixed exchange rate system. You can see fixed exchange rate system here. Everything else remains the same. So this same government thing, so that the IS line should move in this direction like this. And it will result in a higher output level because in Keynesian view, we have created excess demand, and it will result in higher interest rate because higher income levels create excess supply of bonds, resulting in higher interest rate, lower price and higher interest rate. So at the next point, point B, we have higher income and higher interest rate. Like in the earlier graph. So this is our new IS line. And this is our new internal equilibrium at point B. We have higher output, higher interest rate. Now, if the exchange rate is fixed, what should be the adjustment process? Then the central bank should purchase excess demand from this market because we have a BOP surplus. Central bank should buy foreign exchange. And when the central bank purchases foreign exchange from the banks, it has to pay local currency, and so that their deposits will go up. Deposits will go up. When the central bank pays in dollars, buys dollars, paying rupees, the stock of rupee money increases, which is an increase in the money stock in the economy. Money supply goes up in this process. Great money supply goes up. So that how do we show that part? Increase in money stock, because you will see money is here, M0, and it goes up to M1. Therefore, this LM line shift downward or to the right. So where is the new equilibrium point? So point C, this is the old equilibrium point. If we have a market determined exchange rate, the relevant adjustment takes place with the movement of the economy to point C. But with this case, fixed exchange rate, the economy will move to point D, intersection point, where all three lines. What are the three lines? IS, LM, BOP. All three lines intersects at point D, which is the simultaneous equilibrium in all three markets, so that our economy will have even higher economic growth and lower pressure, mild pressure on interest rate, so that in the adjustment process, we achieve balance of payment equilibrium. In the adjustment process, output growth should be higher. Why the balance of payment equilibrium is achieved now? We had observed, you can see we have higher levels of imports now because of this reason. But at the same time, we have a better trade deal. And that trade deal can influence BOP, but because of this higher interest rate, there is capital inflows. In a country with greater capital mobility, the capital account is more important than the trade account. Point D, fiscal expansion and how it leads to different outcomes. Okay, give me a minute. If you miss anything, you can put them back regarding this diagram. Okay, without going into that much details, we will go to the weaker capital mobility case. Weaker capital mobility. If it is weak, how do we show it on the graph? Because our BOP line should be steeper. And if it is vertical, like this, we know it is no capital mobility. Now, in this case, it is not no capital mobility, it is weaker capital mobility. So our line is this blue line. While we are in that situation, the government increases spending. All three markets are in equilibrium at point A. Government increases spending, IS line shifted to the right. So we are here now because of that movement. Increased government spending. So where is the new equilibrium point? It is here. Sorry, it is here. IS and LM, internal equilibrium, is here. So I'm not going to ask you why the interest rate goes up and why the output goes up, because we explained those things earlier. The only thing I ask you now, what is the situation at this equilibrium point regarding BOP position? BOP position. What is the BOP position? You can read the screen and tell the answer. Right? BOP deficit. You can see it here. If we have a weaker capital mobility, fiscal expansion can lead to a BOP deficit. If you have a stronger capital mobility, fiscal expansion can lead to a BOP surplus. Remember the difference. And remember also the causes of the difference. So why we are moving to a BOP deficit now in this case? At point B, we have a BOP deficit. Simple. Weaker capital mobility means the capital account does not play an important role to determine the balance of payment outcome. Then which account determines that? Trade account. So that means actually our trade account gets affected because of this economic growth in response to higher spending of imports now, which means the trade account turned to be a deficit. There is also an increase in interest rate, but that will not generate enough capital flows to compensate for trade deficit. Therefore, the balance of payment situation at point B is a deficit. Okay. Now, the adjustment. If it is a deficit and if the central bank does not intervene in the market, and if the market is left for automatic adjustment mechanism with the market forces, what should happen now is exchange rate depreciates. Exchange rate depreciates. When the exchange rate depreciates, it is good for exports. Where is exports? Here we have net exports. That means it is good for aggregate demand, AD, or it is shown by the IS line, as well as it is part of the BOP line, so that both the IS line and the BOP line should be right direction. We can move both these lines in the right direction. We have already moved the BOP line, so you can see the dotted blue line. And then we have to move the aggregate demand line, IS line. So this is that. So our new equilibrium is at this point, point C. We are having even greater output level, but higher interest rate. Great output, higher interest rate. Why? Because of the improvement in trade account due to exchange rate depreciation. Exchange rate depreciation. There may be capital flows also because of the higher interest rate, but what is more important is exchange rate depreciation, which results in higher trade account. So remember this point C, because when we are going to the other case, fixed exchange rate, you should have that idea what is point C in the previous case. So let's move on. We are at point A. All three markets are in equilibrium there. The blue line shows weaker capital mobility. Weaker capital mobility. Government increased spending so that we have this red line shifted IS line, and our new equilibrium is at point B. We have higher interest rate R1, higher output level Y1. So now we are familiar with these moments and also its outcome for the balance of payment. So what's the balance of payment situation at point B? Deficit. Deficit. So the adjustment now under the stable exchange rate, the central bank doesn't want to intervene in the market. What will happen then? Is central bank should intervene in the market because it has to defend the exchange rate. In that case, the central bank has to reduce foreign reserves and withdraw dollars from the stock of foreign reserves and supply to the market, sell to the commercial banks to meet that excess demand. Where is the excess demand? Excess demand is here. BOP deficit means excess demand for foreign exchange. When the central bank get involved in this activity in local currency, so that the policy will result in lower money supply. The deposit base of the commercial banks will decrease because they pay in rupees to get dollars from the central bank. Lower money stock now. How do we show the lower money stock on this diagram? We have to use LM line and we shift it to the left. So the black dotted line shows that money supply has decreased. Money supply has decreased. Nothing more we need because all three lines are again at equilibrium there. So that interest rate has gone up, but there will be little downward pressure on the output level. So our conclusion is BOP equilibrium is achieved with low output pressure but higher interest rate pressure. So the earlier case, the equilibrium was at this point C. We have great impact on output level, economic growth. Now the pressure is at this point. The economy moves to point D, from B to D. Right, let's now move on to the monetary expansion part. Monetary expansion. So again, we take these two cases. What are the two cases? The first one, greater capital mobility. So that our BOP line should be elastic enough, like the one that we have here, the blue line. This one. So our equilibrium point is here at A, and interest rate is our output level is Y0. Monetary expansion means we are shifting the LM line to the right. So that's why we have this red line, right side to left, the downward, because of the increase in the money, the increase in the money stock. What is the situation at the new equilibrium point, internal equilibrium? Where is internal equilibrium now? It has to be IS and LM. The IS line is this black line and the new LM is here. So that new equilibrium point is here. Point B. What is the BOP situation? It is below the BOP line, so that we know it's a deficit. Always monetary expansion leads to a deficit. Keep it in mind always, okay, regardless of the degree of capital mobility. Monetary expansion always leads to a BOP deficit. But when you explain the reasons, this greater capital mobility are important because under the greater capital mobility, it is the interest rate which plays an important role, so that there will be capital outflows due to lower interest rate. There will be higher imports due to this one. So you can say both will bring balance of payments into disequilibrium, deficit. The adjustment process now under the floating exchange rate adjustment process. exchange rate should depreciate, right? Because we have a deficit here, depreciate. And when it depreciates, it is good for exports and bad for imports, so that the trade account NX will improve. The N also part of the BOP line, so that BOP will also improve. So how do we show these two improvements? Increase in aggregate demand can be shown by shifting the IS line to the right. You can see NX0 has increased to NX1. Also, because it is part of BOP line will also shift to the right. So, where are we right now? After all these moments, our new equilibrium, which bring balance of payment equilibrium to, is here at point C. At point C. So, what is your conclusion? Balance of payments will achieve higher uh, achieve equilibrium with higher output growth and lower, smaller pressure on the interest rate. That is the policy outcome. If the central bank is going to intervene in this market to defend the exchange rate, not that we always allow the foreign exchange market to go on its own, but sometimes we have to allow the central bank to act on behalf of us. So we are at point A and we move to point B, and then we have balance of payment deficit. Now we are looking at the adjustment process under the fixed exchange rate. Fixed exchange rate, the central bank should sell foreign exchange. In return, there will be a collection of local currency, reducing the stock of money. So the money stock reduce means, now what happened? What was our policy? Monetary expansion. Now what is happening? Monetary contraction, lower money supply. So the same policy will get reversed. That's why this reverse arrow here. So we are actually back to point A. Back to point A. Point A is here. Well, may not be exactly because this return of the LM line can be anywhere on the left side. Maybe it is here. What will happen? Our interest rate will be higher and our output will actually be low. Right, so that's the adjustment process. Now let's look at under weaker capital mobility, monetary expansion. So the weaker capital mobility means we show it by drawing this steep POP line like this. So all three markets are in equilibrium at this point. A having R0 equilibrium interest rate, Y0 equilibrium output level, as well as balance of payment equilibrium too. So there is a monetary expansion, and with that monetary expansion, EOP deficit. Where is the deficit? Don't look at this blue dot line still, okay? It is coming later. So where is the new equilibrium point? At point B. At point B. So the interest rate goes down and output goes up, so that there is a deficit, balance of payment deficit. You can see it here, balance of payment deficit at point B. If you have market determined exchange rate system, now the exchange rate should depreciate. And depreciation will shift both BOP and IS lines. Both BOP and IS lines. So this is the shift in the IS line, the black dot line, and this is the shift in the BOP line, the blue dot line. And all three lines are now meeting at point, this one, point maybe D, point C. What is the outcome? Balance of payment equilibrium is achieved, okay, but with higher output level. No pressure on the interest rate or lower pressure on the interest rate, but there will be higher economic growth. If we allow the exchange rate to do the business. Instead, if the central bank is going to do it, what will happen? That is, central bank has to sell foreign exchange. So we are at point A, and we move to point B because of the increase in the money stock. If central bank intervenes, there is a deficit, it has to sell foreign exchange, reducing the stock of foreign exchange. In return, the commercial bank deposits, the base, reserve base will go down. Why? The money in the deposits will flow back to the central bank. So there is a reduction in money supply, which means actually, as we also discussed earlier somewhere, this monetary expansion get reversed. Sorry, that's the end of the lesson, and we are back to point A, original point, and no impact on the output level or the interest rate. Only we made the tour having BOP deficit and came back to the same point, because monetary expansion, for whatever the purpose, growth or stability, has no impact. It's an absurd attempt under these conditions. So that is where we stop this lesson. That lesson is over. If you have any question, please raise now. Let me check the time and the next lesson. Yes, we can go on about today. It took a little long. Why is that? Our next topic is monetarist macroeconomics. Monetarist. So far we were focusing on the Keynesian. And our controversy that we discussed from the beginning up to now is between Keynesian and the classical. But that also changed now because Keynesians developed their approaches further. So Keynesian continued to exist after 1930s, but classical debate against Keynesian going to be now replaced with monetarist debate. So monetarist macroeconomics, we are looking at not a detailed ISLM analysis and those things, but we will use the same approaches to discuss this one also. So we have a smaller topic actually. All the fundamentals, the basic tools we have already discussed. So we can use the same tools. This is an alternative approach to macroeconomic policy. Alternative approach. That means the other one, Keynesian. So economists, so policymakers, so they argue on both these things. At the beginning of our lectures, I gave you a couple of quotations from Portugal and Australia, those things. They were actually, those controversies between Keynesians and monetarists. Monetarists, they emerge in the 1950s. It's a fairly new. Keynesians emerge after 1930s. So about 20 years later, now monetarists are coming and they have the roots in classical economics. So are they classical economics? No, but they originate from classical economics, but there are differences between classicals and monetarists also. At the same time, there are similarities between Keynesians and monetarists. Getting a little complicated, right? But there is a debate, difference, because essentially this monetarist macroeconomics emerged as a critique of Keynesian economics. Although they started in the 1950s, nobody recognized them at that time, so the debate continued, but they gained momentum only after the 1970s. And there is a reason for that. And they gain momentum. At the same time, there is a decline in that popular Keynesianism also. Keynesianism was popular during this time. So by the early 1970s, it was discarded, Keynesianism, allowing for monetarists to dominate the policy making, macroeconomic policy making. So that's the approach. So let's look at a little bit about the history. History. What is the basic Keynesian policy recommendation? Demand management policy. That means when the private sector is weaker, this is particularly when there is economic slowdown, economic crisis. Private sector is quite weak. So the demand management, that's the best time to exercise demand management policies. Because when the private demand is down, public demand can be raised with higher spending. So this shows exactly the situation after World War II. Because the world economy, particularly that of the advanced countries, it had been damaged or collapsed or destroyed by the World War II. And even prior to that, the Great Depression. Which means now there was enough for government spending in these countries for construction and reconstruction activities. Their economies have to be built up again. So the governments have a bigger role to play. The war damage infrastructure had to be built up. Private sector has to be raised up again, should be supported. There was enough space for government spending. That means expansionary fiscal policy, which is practiced in the 50s and the 60s. What about the monetary policy? Monetary policy had no space. Why not? This is a result of the Mundell-Fleming model that we mentioned sometimes back, about 2-3 weeks back. Because the exchange rate at that time, it was fixed exchange rate. Because the world moved into the floating, the market determined exchange rate only in the 1970s. Before that, it was a fixed exchange rate system. And there were capital mobility cases in the advanced countries. Capital mobility was quite free. And under these two conditions, if a country has these two conditions, according to Mundell-Fleming model, there is no monetary policy autonomy. Which means the central bank cannot use the monetary policy to achieve macroeconomic objectives, growth and stability. It's going to be absurd or futile 1971, we did that also. The entire world did that. But then the inflation comes only after a time. So in this case, in the West, the inflation started to pick up only after the 1960s. In fact, towards the end of 1960s and 70s was the most troublesome period, 70s, because it was combined with the oil price hike also, 73. The second reason, collapse of the Bretton Woods system. Now, don't tell me that you don't know what is this system, because we have mentioned it in the class. Bretton Woods system established the fixed exchange rate case in the world in 1944. So by 1971, nearly more than 2.5 decades, experience with fixed exchange rate system or Bretton Woods system, countries could not, United States and Western European countries, they were unable to maintain that international monetary system. So it's called Bretton Woods system. So the international monetary system collapsed. That means countries started using flexible exchange rate system, float-in exchange rate system after that. Then here we come with the slowing down growth. In fact, the most, the golden era of economic growth for the Western countries, for United States, was after the Second World War. Keynesian policy supported it too. So 1950s, 60s, they were having wonderful, marvelous, higher growth rate, 5%, even more. Japan had about 10% average growth rate, about 25 years. And other Western countries, they had around 5%, 6% growth rate. And growth declined, and now inflation was rising. And another blow came with the oil price hike in 1973. With the combination of the two things, and the world was having stagflation, stagnation plus inflation. Now, you can see the background of monetarists. Now, monetarists were gaining their popularity in this background, and according to their explanation, it is because of the excessive money growth. The world is moving to a higher inflationary regime at that time, and resulting in a worse situation regarding macroeconomic stability. According to monetarists, there is one reason behind excessive money growth. Excessive money growth. In fact, they also had another alternative explanation for the Great Depression, which is due to inadequate money growth at that time. Inadequate money growth. Okay, so that's the history behind the rise of monetarism. The pioneering economist in this tradition is Milton Friedman. He and another author, Anna Schwartz, they had this pioneering publication. They had many publications. This is one of the top. Monetary History of the United States. They also, the Milton Friedman had a famous statement which is quoted even today everywhere. All economists know about it, which is inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. That means there is no other reason. Everywhere and always, inflation is due to money. Therefore, according to monetarist view, this is the core of the monetarist argument. The monetarist view is to keep the supply of and demand for money at equilibrium. That is the responsibility of the central bank. There is money demand coming from the society, so keep the money supply to meet that demand and avoid excessive money growth, and also avoid lesser money growth. Both. It has to keep it up with the money demand. Right. So yesterday I moved little too far, but I will catch up next week when we meet. I'm going to stop here. So if you have any questions, please raise. Any questions? Okay, seems there are no questions, so that we can wind up now and have a good evening and see you again next week. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.